Hello, my name is Xander and welcome back to another tutorial. In this tutorial, we're going to learn how to trigger GitHub workflows using scheduled events. So more specifically, we're going to use GitHub Actions to trigger code, our workflow, to send an email utilizing Python and Gmail. So essentially, by the end of this tutorial, you will have a piece of code which will automatically, at a specified time that you specify, trigger a piece of code which is going to send an email. So this tutorial for beginners, here we're going to learn a little bit about GitHub Actions, building a schedule utilizing Cron job. We'll learn a little bit how to utilize Python to actually send email with Gmail. And then we'll go through a little bit of security here. Because we're using username and passwords, we're going to utilize environment variables via GitHub to actually set and to hide our credentials so that we can then utilize it within our Python code safely. Just before we get started, a big thank you to all the channel members for your support. If you were thinking about supporting this channel further, you can do by becoming a channel member or potentially following us on Patreon. You will find us also on some of the socials, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Discord. And if you do like some of the content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. So I'm assuming that you're a complete beginner here. So the first thing you'll need to do is go ahead and download GitHub Desktop. So go over to your search engine, type in GitHub Desktop. You will find that it's probably the top option. That will take you to a page which looks like this. You can see that GitHub Desktop is available for Mac, Windows, and Linux. So we are going to be utilizing GitHub Desktop here. Now, these actions can be performed via the command line. So if you feel more comfortable doing that, please do that. But we are going to start off by creating a new repository. Once you have downloaded and installed, and if you don't have a GitHub account, you're going to need a GitHub account, open up the application. You should be presented with something that looks similar to this. And from here, we can then start working with GitHub Actions. Now, I'm utilizing a Mac version of GitHub Desktop, but it should look fairly similar if you're on Windows. Right, so once you're logged in, let's go ahead, and I know you can't see the menu here, but if you go up to File, you should find New Repository. So we're going to build a new repository. So let's call this GitHub Actions Schedule. Email. Okay, so that's our new repository. Just make sure you choose the path where you want to actually create the new repository. So in this case, we're not going to go through GitHub ignore, license, etc. We just need to create a new repository. So let's go ahead and do that. And now we can go ahead and, assuming you've got Visual Studio Code installed, I'm going to open that up in Visual Studio Code, and that's going to open up to where your repository has been created. So at this point, we have a new repository. So we can go back to GitHub Desktop and we can go ahead and publish our new repository. So I'm going to keep this private for now. I'm not. So we'll go ahead and publish our new repository. Go ahead and do that. So that's basically just going to upload and create a new repository utilizing or on the online GitHub repository service. So we can now go ahead and view the GitHub repository. Just bring that down. And there we go. So we have a new GitHub repository. Okay, so back in Visual Studio Code, remember we've opened Visual Studio Code up where we created our new repository. So let's go ahead and now create a new workflow. Right, so what we're going to need to do here then, let's create a new folder. So it's going to be .github, and then that's a new folder called .github. And inside of here, we're going to need to create a new folder, and that's going to be called workflows. Okay, so inside of here, we're going to create a new file, and that's going to be called daily report. Or it could be weekly report, whatever you want. I'm just going to call it daily report. So that needs to be a YAML file. So we're going to specify in this file here the actions that we want to perform. Again, I'm just assuming that you're completely new to this, but if we go back now into our GitHub desktop, you can see that it's actually noticed that there is a change, because this is what it's doing. It's detecting any changes in our code base. So we have created a new folder here, and it's asking us now to commit. So I'm just going to say a new commit, NC, and then commit to main. I realize you can't see this. There's a button at the bottom left. Let me just see if I can bring that into view so you can see everything now. So I'm going to now commit that to main and then push to origin. So that's basically just going to upload it to our repository. So when we go back to our repository and refresh the page, we now have our new folder. So you can start to see the workflow here if you are completely new to GitHub. Right, so at the moment, obviously we don't actually have any actions that we're performing, but let's just take a look here at what we have. So eventually, when we actually specify an action, that's going to be available. It's going to run, and we can see it run in the Actions tab here. So if we go to Actions, you can see at the moment, nothing has run. In actual fact, we've got an error. It tried to run something, but it's failed. So let's have a look. The workflow file. So file not found. So the workflow file could not be found. So basically, we don't actually have any jobs yet. So it's not actually showing anything there. But eventually, when we create an action, that's where we're going to see the action being performed. And here we can diagnose if there's any errors or any problems. And you can see here that there is an error because we don't actually have any actions yet in our daily report YAML file. Okay, so let's go back to our file. So in the github.github workflows, don't forget the dot before the GitHub workflows. In this folder here, in this file, sorry, we're going to create a new name. So let's give it a name, shall we? Name, let's just call it daily report. So now we need to specify the trigger, or what should trigger the actions that we want to perform. So here in the documentation, it is very comprehensive if you haven't already started reading it. Events that trigger workflows. So here it specifies all the different triggers that can trigger a workflow. And one of these just happens to be schedule. So we're going to utilize schedule. Searching this page or utilizing the menu here, going down to schedule, we can then have a look at the snapshot or the examples here of how to set up a scheduled event. It's very simple. We need the on and the schedule keyword and then specify cron or our cron job. So this basically defines the time, the date in when we want to actually run our job, our code. So let's go ahead and build this. So on, and this is important that you identify the tabs or utilize tab correctly. So this code won't run if you don't utilize correctly formed code, like any code really. So here I've utilized a tab. So schedule, and then we need to specify our cron job. So let's go for cron. And then at the moment, let's just specify this to run every minute. So the reality of that in GitHub here, as of recording this tutorial, that probably won't run every minute. I think if you look in the GitHub documentation, I think it's a little bit random sometimes. So generally, it won't run at the exact specific time that you request. So it's not actually recommended to utilize this if you have time critical aspects that you want to run. It can be a little bit flaky. So it is actually recommended in the documentation, or it is spelled out to you that it isn't recommended for time critical events. And that can be performed in other ways. But this in general case, and for the case that we're utilizing in this scenario to send an email every month, for example, then it could be a good way of working. But just thinking off the top of my head, I think it's every 15 minutes is the minimum amount of time we can perform a scheduled task. A little bit of an advanced topic maybe, but you have to be careful here. So just talking about scheduling events every 15 minutes, for example, these events take time to build. So behind the scenes, GitHub needs to read your code, then build everything, put everything in place, and then perform the actions. So that build time takes time. Now, if you are using a free account, you only get a certain amount of build time every month. So just be careful that if you are setting up these tasks, that you're not utilizing all of your build time, or potentially you might find that it will stop working because you don't have any build time left to actually perform these actions. So just be careful there, but you won't you won't incur any costs. So don't worry about that. You'll simply just run out of your build time. If you go over to the plans, we may as well have a quick look at it. In this free account here at the moment, as I record this tutorial, you get 2,000 CI/CD minutes a month. So that's just referring to the amount of time it takes to actually kind of run that action. That's going to then reduce your 2,000 CI/CD minutes. So just be careful about that. Now, if you obviously want more, you can pay for more and you get more minutes and so on. But it's not something you need to worry about really, but just be careful of if you are trying to run something every 15 minutes, for example. So if that doesn't make sense, don't worry, I will re-emphasize that later on in the tutorial. So now we have our schedule in place, and I will speak about Cron in a little bit more detail in a second, but let's go ahead now and build what is known as a job. So let's create a job here, or jobs, and then let's give this a name. So let's just call this my job. And then we need to then define what this runs on. So for example, what OS this needs to run on. So runs on, and let's go for Ubuntu latest. Okay, so we need some sort of platform to run our code on. So that's going to be the case. Now there are different platforms that we can utilize, so it's well worth having a look at the documentation here, but for simplicity, that is what we're going to do. So now what we need to do is define our steps. So let's go ahead and do that. So steps, and then let's give this step a name. This is going to be first step, and then let's go ahead now and run, and we'll just do an echo hello world for now, just to see if this actually works. So just make sure you've saved that. If you haven't got it on, then just go to File and Auto Save. That's going to save a little bit of time. Right, so once you've done that, let's go back into GitHub Desktop. So you can see that it's found that you've made some changes. So let's go ahead and create some new changes. So I've just typed in NC there, new commit. So I'm going to now commit to main. So I then need to push to the origin. So it uploads it to GitHub. And then back in GitHub here then, let's go ahead and go into the code. You can see by going into the code that the code has now been updated. So let's go back into actions. Now notice at the moment, nothing has been actioned yet. So let's just go ahead first of all and just delete the workflow run from the previous attempt. And let's go into all workflows here. And you can see that there is nothing here. There are no workflows run yet. So let's remember we're using a triggered event, in this case, a schedule. Now, remember what I said initially, looking at the documentation in GitHub, there are many different ways of triggering workflows. So what can be handy is that if you can manually trigger a workflow, because here in this case, you're just trying to wait for a cron job, and that can take a minute, a couple minutes, and you want to see and check to make sure your job is working potentially. So what we can do here is we utilize workflow dispatch, and that basically just allows us to manually trigger a workflow. So let's just try this out. So we'll just type in there workflow dispatch. Let's go back into our GitHub desktop. Let's go for a new commit. Let's push that back, and let's go back into GitHub online. So let's just do a refresh, and you can now see I have the option of selecting run workflow. So I've got a manual way of actually running the workflow. So let's go ahead and click on run workflow. So that takes a couple of seconds, just need to be a bit patient there, but you can now see that our daily report is now running. So what we can do is we can drill down. If we select daily report, the title, that allows us to drill down further, and you can see by clicking over here, you can see the steps that GitHub has taken in order to set up your job. So there's the timing in which it took to actually set up your job here. So the first step, remember that was our first step, which correlates to the code here, our first step. So the name was first step, and then we run this piece of code here. So going back in the code, we run echo hello world, and you can see there we've then returned hello world, and then our job has been completed. So you can see up the top here, we can rerun all the jobs, and we've got a few different options here. We can create a status badge, which we can put in our repository, for example, but that gives you the basic flow of how to work and interact with actions that have been run. So if we go back into the documentation, we're told in actual fact a schedule can be set up, or the shortest interval you can run scheduled workflows is every 5 minutes in actual fact. So I think I said 15 earlier. So it's every 5 minutes. So looking at the cron here, notice that cron, there are 5 different stars and they represent different things. So here it does detail the information. So minutes, hour, day of the month, day of the week. So we can schedule at just about any time we want to schedule a task. If there was something specific you wanted to use cron for in terms of time, then just have a look at the cron. Well, there's plenty of different websites. If you just type in cron job set time, there are lots of different generators and more information about how to kind of customize and set your cron job at specific times or dates. You can see there are a few different operators that you can utilize, and that allows you then to further customize the cron job. So let's go back in our code then. Let's just change this 1 to 5. We'll save that and we'll go ahead and commit that. So back in GitHub Actions here, let's just go ahead and just commit that. So we'll push to origin. So whilst we're doing that, in actual fact, you can see that the daily report was scheduled and it did actually run utilizing our schedule. Now that wasn't because we just uploaded or recommitted new code. We changed 1 to 5. This happened before we did that change. So you can see roughly there's around about 7-8 minutes in between the task from it being uploaded to it then being scheduled automatically via cron. So if your task hasn't started, you might just need to be a little bit more patient. Just double check to make sure it does run. So run it manually to make sure it does run and there isn't any code errors. And then it should probably take around about up to 10 or 15 minutes before it might get triggered. So your case might be slightly different, but in this case, you can see that the code that we're using, it is actually being scheduled. So now we've got confirmation that our daily report will be sent or generated automatically via our schedule. Let's now focus on utilizing Python to send an email. Okay, so I was leading you down the road there and I wasn't quite correct, but I just wanted to get the idea before we moved on to this. So I do apologize. Maybe I shouldn't have approached it in that way. So previously I mentioned that our workflow was going to work every 5 minutes. So that was just misinformation really. I do apologize, but I just wanted to get into the idea of understanding what was happening. Now, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't have done that, and I'm too far into the tutorial now to kind of go back and do that again. So you've kind of got the idea now. Then these here represent the time and the date in which you want to start your cron job, or in this case, the scheduled action. So let's just focus more closely on what this represents. Now, something like this is really good to have a look at. This is going to allow you to kind of support, or is going to allow you to help you work out exactly when your cron job is going to work. So this is crontab.guru, and you can see that you can type in here, and then that by changing these stars here to numbers, that's going to give you an idea of exactly when your cron job is going to run. Now we saw earlier some of these different parameters that we could utilize. Here, the slash here represents the step value. So here, for example, if I did actually want to set this up for every 5 minutes, in actual fact, I would need */5, and that would run every 5th minute of the hour. Now, what we have at the moment is at minute 5. So every 5 minutes of every hour, the cron job is going to work. So currently that's how we're set up. So in actual fact, we want to change this to */5, and then that's going to potentially run every 5 minutes. Hopefully that makes sense, but have a look at the crontab.guru, and there are plenty of other sites like I alluded to earlier that's going to provide the same type of service, but this is kind of a handy tool to help you work out exactly when you want to run your cron job. Okay, so now we've changed our cron job to every 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and just upload that back, push that back up. So we commit and we push that. So that should now be set for every 5 minutes. So let's get back into sending emails with Python. Right, so we're going to go ahead and create a new file. And we're going to trigger this file to be utilized by our action. So we're just going to call this sendemail.py. There are a few different ways of utilizing or using Python to send email. That isn't necessarily the focus of this tutorial, so I won't go into too much depth, but we'll give you enough information so that you can start utilizing Python to send email and connect that to this action that we're going to create. In order to send an email, we are going to need an SMTP server. So in this case, we're going to be utilizing Gmail. That, of course, doesn't mean that you can't use any other service. Now, for security, we are going to need to set this up so that we can utilize Gmail in a secure way. So I do have on this email 2-step authentication set up, and there are some changes that are happening over in Gmail which will prevent you from just utilizing your username and password in the future. I don't think that's been fully applied yet, but let's go ahead. What we're going to need to do is to generate a secret key that our application can utilize. Okay, so let's generate an app password. Right, so what we're going to need to do here is go over to your account, manage your Google accounts. That should take you to here. Select security, and then from here, we're going to need to check the app password. Okay, so if I click on that here, it's going to ask me for my password. Now you can see that I've already set up an app password, but essentially I'm just going to select an app, and I can just select, for example, other, and then I can type in a name for it. In this case, I typed in GitHub. So let's just go for GitHub 2 and then generate. And you can see that you're going to be provided a password like this, for example, and make sure you've copied that and keep that somewhere secure for now. And that's pretty much it. So that's going to be your password that your app is going to utilize in order for you to then be able to utilize the SMTP server. Okay, so with that set up, we should now be ready to get started with the code. So first of all, then, let's just take you through the Python code that we're going to be utilizing. So first up, then, we're going to need to import and utilize the SMTP lib. So this is going to provide us, this is a module that helps us utilize or define an SMTP client session object so that we can actually send an email. Okay, so in addition, we're also probably going to need to use SSL. Okay, secure socket layer. So that's going to provide a little bit of security for us. Right, so let's define the port that we're going to be utilizing. So here we're going to be utilizing port 465. So let's just set up some other kind of parameters here. So our SMTP server, let's define that. So here we're going to be utilizing Gmail. So smtp.gmail.com. And then we're going to need a username in order to log into our account so we can utilize the SMTP server. So here we're going to say username equals os.environ. So here we're going to use environment variables. So we're not actually going to define here in our code our user email. Let's call this user email. Our email and password. So we're going to secure that. So what that means essentially is that instead of us having to actually write a username and password and then upload that to our GitHub repository where potentially other employees, or if we have a public repository, others can see it, we're going to secure our credentials utilizing environment variables. So in a minute, we're going to go to GitHub and set up our environment variable. No one can access this. No one can see this. Once it's been set up, we can then just utilize it within our code. And that's going to help secure our username and our password. So we are going to need OS. So let's go ahead and import OS. Okay, right. So that's username. Let's do password. Password equals OS. So this doesn't exist yet. These environment variables. So we're going to need to set them up in GitHub in a second. So that's going to be user password. So user password here and user email is a reference to the environment variables that we're going to set up. Right, so with that in place, let's just build a very simple message. So let's just define a message. So we'll give it a subject. Let's give it a subject. So subject, hi, new email. Well, let's call this GitHub, GitHub report, email report. So that's our subject. This is your daily email report. That's the content of the message, and that's pretty much it really for the message. Okay, so that's pretty much everything that we need to set that up. Now we need to actually send the email. So let's set up context equals SSL dot create default context, and then let's say let's use smtp lib dot smtp SSL. So that's how we're going to secure everything. So let's define our SMTP server. We're going to need the port and then the context equals context. Just check out the documentation if you're not too sure what this code is doing exactly, if that's of interest to you, as server. Okay, and then let's go ahead now. So as server, just zoom out a little bit so you can see everything. So we're going to say server dot login. So now we're going to define our login. So that's going to be username and password. That's what we set up earlier. So that's going to log us into the SMTP server. Happy days. And we're doing that using SSL. So we're doing that in a secure way. So we're going to say server.send email or send mail. So we're going to need the username. We're going to need the username. Right. So here in actual fact, what we're doing is we need to know who to send it to. So from, who's it from? Well, that's our email. To, or actually, in fact, we're just going to send it to ourselves. So this is why it says username again. So we're just sending it to ourselves. You might have your own specific user that you want to send it to. You can set that up, of course. But in this case, I'm just going to send it to myself. And then finally, we're going to need the message, right? So let's just add the message in there too. So that's actually going to send. So we log in and then we go ahead and send the email. And that's pretty much it for the code that we're going to utilize here to send an email. Okay, so next up then, let's go back into our YAML file, our daily report. We're going to need to change this so it now kind of fires off our email. So let's go ahead and we're going to say build here. So jobs build runs on Ubuntu latest. That's absolutely fine. So steps. So let's first of all define users. So we're going to need to define our checkout here. So that's going to allow us to kind of run the actions. So checkout at version 2. So this is basically just predefined scripts that are just going to run for us, so we don't need to go into any major detail about setting things up. Now we are going to be using Python, so let's set that up or make sure that's going to be available. So Python at v2, for example, and then now we've done that, let's say with, and then we define our Python version. Version. So the Python version is going to be 3.x, for example. So you can utilize whatever you like or whatever is supported at the time of using or following this tutorial. So let's give this a name. So run email script or code. So now we're going to go to the next step. So now we've kind of set up everything here in terms of the Python environment. Let's go ahead now and run our new script. So first thing that we're going to need to do is set up the environment variables, make sure that they're available. So we're going to set up an environment variable called user email. Okay, so we're going to grab now the environment variable that we're going to set up in secrets shortly. So secrets.user email. Okay, so that grabs that and makes it available for our code. And then user password. So this correlates, user password and user email correlates here. So we're going to grab that detail. So we're going to store our username and our email and password securely in GitHub. And then we're going to grab that out and utilize it in our code. Right, so we'll do the same thing again here. So this time it's going to be secrets dot, and then we're going to set up another environment variable called user password. There we go. So that grabs that, and then we go ahead and run our code, right? So let's run Python send email.py. So that's going to run our code right here. And that's pretty much it. Okay, so back in our repository here, let's go to settings. Let's go to secrets and actions, and then let's create a new repository secret. So the first secret was called user email. So let's go ahead and do that. So make sure it's a case sensitive user email. So here we're going to need to add the value. Now remember, you can see this value, but once we've set this, the secret is then set. No one else can then access it. So in this case, now remember, this is just a demo email that I've set up for this tutorial. So it probably won't exist after this tutorial. So this is viacad.testemail@gmail.com. So I press add secret, and now that's disappeared. So that's pretty much all we can see, user email. So the next thing we need to do is add another secret. So this is going to be user password. Okay, so this is where you need to add the app password that we set up previously. So hopefully you've saved it. So go ahead and type that in, the app password that was generated earlier, and then that's the email and password set up. Right, so now we have that. Our repository should be able to access those secrets. So let's go back to the code. There shouldn't be anything else that we need to do. So we're going to grab the environment variables, and we're going to utilize those to actually send the email. I think that's all set up nicely. We're going to set our cron job at every 5 minutes. Yeah, I think we're good to go. So now we made the changes. Let's go back into GitHub desktop, and then we'll go ahead and make a new commit, and then we publish that or push that to the origin. So that's now uploaded. So let's go back into our repository here. So our code has just been uploaded. You can have a look at it if you're not too sure. So that's definitely the latest version. Let's go back into our module here. So we can see that we've got the send email file as well. So back in actions here. Right, so let's just go ahead and delete these work runs here. So we can identify our new work run when it's run. So that should take around about maybe 5, 10, 15 minutes for it to be triggered. So I'm just going to wait, and I'll see you in a couple of minutes. Or because we utilize the workflow dispatch trigger, it does mean that we can run it instantly and check to see if it works, because there's nothing worse than waiting 5 minutes for it to fail. So I'm going to do exactly that. So here, because I have, or we set the workflow dispatch here, that means that we can set this manually. So we can trigger this manually. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's run this workflow. Give that a couple of seconds. That should start running. So let's go in and take a look. So it's going through the build process at the moment. So we can drill down. You can see it's setting up the job. And you can see straight away that there is an error here. So it says action checkout at version 2, repository not found. So going back into the code here, you can see that we missed the S. So that gives us some good detail there. And obviously that prevents us from having to wait 5 minutes or 10 minutes for it to run. So good. So now I've updated that. Let's go back in and just refresh that code. So I'm just going to recommit that to the repository. So now I've recommitted that. Let's just go back into our actions again. I'm just going to remove that, delete that workflow. Nope. Yeah, we're going to delete that workflow run. Okay, so let's go back in. Let's just run our workflow again. So again, it's going to take a couple of seconds for it to start. But once it's, looks like there's two, looks like the schedules seem to have happened exactly the same time here. So this is going to be interesting, but let's go back in and you can see it's going to start to build. So we can drill down here. So it looks like it's set up okay. Everything was absolutely fine and the job was completed. Cool. So it looks like the job was completed without any errors. You can see that it happened pretty much instantly twice. So what we should have now is a new email. So if I go back into my emails, you can see that we had 2 jobs running. So therefore we have 2 emails and there we go. So this is your daily email report. So there we have it, a baseline for creating GitHub triggers, which will then schedule, in this case, sending an email with Python and Gmail. So if you have got this far, thank you very much. It's always good to get your feedback, particularly if you've got this far, because it probably means that you've gone through the whole tutorial. So let me know what you like, what you don't like about the style of the tutorial. Maybe just the depth that I provided. Maybe there's some other ideas or things you want to learn about, in which case just let me know and I'll try my best to try and accommodate you. So once again, thank you very much for listening and I hope to see you in the next tutorial.